excited that so many of you have joined us today. The League of Women Voters envisions a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. The Palo Alto League is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation of citizens in government through education. We're a nonpartisan political organization that endorses initiatives, but never a political party or candidate for office. We're membership-based and invite all of you over the age of 16 to become a member, citizen or non-citizen, gender neutral, by going to our website, leaguewomenvoterspaloalto.org. As this is a webinar, just want to let you all know that you are all muted, so we will not hear you. You do not need to worry about your mute and unmute button. However, we do welcome your questions. So just go to your Q&A at the bottom. You'll see a little icon bottom of your screen. And if you have questions, we encourage you to put those into that function throughout Julie's presentation, as Kathy Miller, who you see here on the screen, is going to be managing the Q&A. And when Julie finishes, she will be working with Julie and feeding her questions, your questions to her. We are delighted to have as our guest speaker today, Julie Lythcott Haims, a former corporate lawyer and Stanford Dean. Julie holds a BA from Stanford, a JD from Harvard, and an MFA in writing from California College of the Arts. She serves on the boards of the Foundation for College Education, Global Citizen of the Year, Common Sense Media, and the Writer's Grotto, and is on the advisory board of leanin.org. She volunteers with the hospital program, No One Dies Alone. Julie believes in humans. She explains, "One of the universal truths I have come to appreciate about us humans is that we all want to know we matter. We all have this heart that aches to be held and fears being pierced. When we dare to share those vulnerable pieces with one another and have that reciprocated, it makes being human exquisite." Julie is a TED Talk speaker and the author of 2 books, How to Raise an Adult and Real American, a personal narrative of growing up Black and biracial in white spaces. And soon, Your Turn, How to Be an Adult. We also want to share with you that Julie is Jeannie Lythcott's daughter, whom many of you know. Julie has agreed to do this webinar for us during an extremely busy time for her because of her mother's great affection and dedication and service to the League. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Julie Lythcott Haims, who will speak to us on the personal and the political, what COVID-19 reveals and how we might respond. Welcome, Julie.
Myra, thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate all the work that's gone into this on your part and on the part of so many of your committee members. Thank you. My mom is not on her own screen. She's actually here with me in my little yard pod. Wave. There you go, Mom. And that's because of technological issues and challenges. But I want you to know that as Myra read that lovely intro, a quote apparently of mine, both my mom and I went, oh, like, oh, that's a nice quote. I think I did not write that very recently, and so it's in the recesses of my memory, and I found myself thinking, well, that was a really nice thing to write, Julie. Good job. So thank you, Myra, for reading that. Nancy, I also want to thank you and the board and anyone who had anything to do with making this series happen and inviting me. I want you to know I'm wearing my League of Women Voters Palo Alto t-shirt, y'all. Democracy is not a spectator sport, as you all know better than anybody. And I think in some ways that's what my talk is ultimately about. When Myra and her team invited me to talk, it was actually 3 months ago. It was late March. And, we were like, okay, so, it'll be June. And originally the talk was titled, "The Personal and the Political, What COVID-19 Showed Us About Ourselves," past tense. And of course, here we are in late June, and we are still discovering what COVID wants to show us. We are not in any way out of this pandemic. And I think in some ways, the fact that the talk was called that, and I called the talk that, revealed a hopefulness on my part, that by the time we got to late June, this would be behind us. We would have beaten this thing. I think it revealed a naivete on my part, certainly a lack of understanding. We now know that life as we know it, life as we knew it, may never be the same. And I think that we experience some sadness around that, but I think we also experience some hope in knowing that life as we knew it is not going to return to that state. Sometimes there's hope around that because for many, life as we knew it is not a state we want to return to. And here I'm evoking Roxane Gay, who on, I believe it was May 30th, wrote a beautiful op-ed for the New York Times about what was happening with the pandemic of racism revealed by the other pandemic. And she ended that essay, that op-ed, by saying, normal is a state Blacks yearn to be free from, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing her. But in other words, returning to normal is probably not the best way to think about how to move forward. As I speak on my thoughts about the personal and the political and what we've learned about our nation and about ourselves, thanks to COVID, thanks to this time, I hope you'll take an interest in what arises in your head and in your heart and in your spirit as I speak. Whatever I say is my personal opinion based on work that I do and places I find myself and things that concern me. So I'm not speaking to you specifically when I say what the problem is or what we need to do. I am here with you, but I am not pointing a finger at anybody. But nevertheless, when a speaker speaks, often things emerge in the psyche, in the heart, in the mind of the listener. And that's your soul, yourself, if you will, your mind speaking to you. So notice, if you can, what comes up for you, what you disagree with, what you agree with, what's hard for you, where you're feeling a lot of energy, where you're feeling frustration. Because I think that's really the interesting stuff. And that's how we get to, okay, so what are we going to do about any of this? Noticing what mattered for you as I speak will, I think, really contribute to a very informed and lively Q&A, which we'll get to when I shut up, which will hopefully be about 30 minutes from now. And we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. All right. So the personal and the political, I'm going to start with the personal. I want to tell you a little bit about what personal looks like for me, Julie Lythcott Haims. I live in a multi-generational household with my amazing mother, who's already had some screen time, but here she is again. My amazing mother, for whom the League has been such an important part of her activism and service. And can I say how old you are? You're not shy about that, right? I don't think so, but you know, you never tell a lady's age, so I had to get permission. Mom is 81. I am 52. My beloved life partner, I still call him my boyfriend, but we have been married for 27 years. Dan Lythcott Haims is 51. And our two children are Sawyer, who's 21 as of last Monday, and Avery, who will be 19 at the end of July. And we're all back at home here in Palo Alto on a piece of property we all bought together. My mother went in halvesies with us because we were trying to figure out how to afford to live in the community that purportedly had the best public schools in the area. And she sold her house back east and we sold ours in San Carlos, and to put our money together to buy one truly damaged house in Palo Alto that nobody else wanted. And that was a decision we made back in the year 2000. And we were going to fix up what was here, ultimately decided it made the most sense to take it down and rebuild. And we have lived together in this rebuilt house since 2002. And Mom now in a separate but attached cottage for about 5 years. So that's what my personal life looks like. And in terms of what I've learned from COVID personally, I want to start with the importance of human connection. When I discovered that I and everyone had to shelter in place, this meant that my life as a public speaker just ground to a halt. I make my living from traveling around the country and sometimes going to other countries to talk about one of my 2 books that Myra mentioned, Real American, How to Raise an Adult. And all of that just ground to a halt. And I had to figure out how to turn my work into something I could do through this laptop. And my work is inherently about talking about issues I care about, being in community with people around these topics covered by my books, listening, connecting, engaging. And very quickly, I noticed I was missing people. I am an extrovert. I am comfortable. I need people. And this shelter in place, which for me began on March 10th, because I have an underlying condition that makes me more afraid of COVID than the average person. I was sheltering in place and I was getting pretty lonely pretty fast. And so what did I do? I decided to hold virtual office hours. I used to have office hours as a dean at Stanford. So my thing was, let me turn this Zoom, which I barely know how to use, back then. Remember those days? Barely knew how to use Zoom. Let me turn that into something I can offer people. And I went out on Facebook and Twitter and, Instagram and said, hey, I'm going to just hold virtual office hours. If you feel like connecting to other humans, you just want to show up, share, listen, connect, come. I will convene that. And I think I did that 12 times in the first 21 days, something like that. And I took notes and people shared, and they were strangers mostly, strangers to me, certainly strangers to each other. And I was struck by how hungry we were to just reach out and know somebody was there to grab our hand. The COVID thing, when it was new, it felt like this howling darkness. And, there's fear and there's worry and there's all the logistics and all of that. And just reaching out and knowing, like, if I put my hand out, will somebody grab a hold of it and say, you are not alone? That is something I was trying to offer others. And I think it had that kind of altruistic, I'm here for you bent. But in all honesty, I came to appreciate, probably by the 7th or 8th session, who was I really doing it for? Me. Well, I was certainly doing it for me as much as for anybody else. In other words, I had recognized I am lonely. I am hurting. I am missing the juice that comes out of meaningful human interaction. Here's a related story. So I'm learning this about myself. When about 2 weeks into shelter in place, my son has now come home. He's quarantined in our house because he came from Portland back to rejoin us. So we've got Sawyer, the then 20-year-old, now 21, quarantined upstairs, getting food on demand, which he loved. We have Avery, who's 18. We have Mom, me, and Dan. One day, about 2 weeks in, we're all sort of near the front door, except for Sawyer, who's quarantined. And my mom announces, she's got her bag, and she announces, I'm going to the store. And Dan and Avery and I look at each other and look at her like, you can't do that. And we tell her that, like, sorry, Mom, but you can't. We'll go for you. That's what we've been doing, and we will. She's like, no, I'm going to go. It'll be fine, da, da, da. And we're trying to impress upon her why she shouldn't go, why the governor has said she can't go, right, all of that. And what she finally says is, I just need to see some people. And I've only seen y'all 3 times in the last 2 weeks. Well, I look at my mother like she's crazy because I know I've seen her 20 times in the last 2 weeks. Why? Because I'm making it a priority. I've got my Zoom stuff. I've got my strangers on the office hours. I'm trying to do my work, and then I got to check in on my mom, right? I know it's been 20 times. Mom's saying it's been 3 times. And we're just now, kind of arguing on the front stoop. And Mom is like, I got to go to the store to see some people because I'm not seeing you, right? So she promises us, if there's a lot of people, I'll turn around. But I've got a mask. I've got my hand sanitizers. I'm going to go. So off she goes. Because, my mother, she will not be deterred, as you know. So when she leaves, my amazing daughter says, Mom, I think both you and Gaga are right. My children call my mother Gaga. And I said, how's that, Avery? She said, well, for you, you've seen Gaga 20 times, in the last 2 weeks, because you're making a point about you're popping in. But for Gaga, it's not a visit unless you come in and sit down, and she's going to offer you something to drink, and you're going to have a nice conversation that might be 45 minutes or an hour or what have you. And I thought, my goodness, this child is so right. I thought I was seeing my mom, I was visiting my mom in the ways that were working for me, but they weren't working for her. And so I kissed my daughter. My mom comes back from the store, and I go over to her and I say, look, I realize where the disconnect is. And we've got to do something about that. And from that day on, we've had a morning coffee at 8. Mom gets up at 6:30, but I do not get up at 6:30. So 8 o'clock work for me. I start my day, I roll out of bed, make some coffee and go over and Mom and I sit together and we watch the birds and we talk about the news and we talk about family and we talk about everything. And that's become such a cherished, now I'm looking at her like, we cherish this, right? Like we cherish this ritual we have going, right? And so I learned that what I need by way of human connection may be different from what other people need. And if we really are going to connect with our loved ones, well, we got to know what they need, not just what we need. So that's one of my important learnings. And let me just go a step now away from the personal narrative to the more abstract. Research shows that longevity for humans is a function of how strong our human connections are. If you doubt this in any respect, I want you to get the book Friendship by Lydia Denworth. I'm going to just see if I can quickly find it on my bookshelf and show it to you. Friendship by Lydia Denworth. Okay. This book documents, based on research on primates and non-human and human type, shows that what leads to longevity is not, your cholesterol score when you're 50, but how strong your personal connections were, how strong and deep and reliable and connected those connections are, is what determines whether you're going to live a long life or not. Okay. So this matters. It's not just feel good, touchy feely, whatever. Okay. It's science and it's necessary. We're seeing the mental health implications of this shelter in place. Many of us are struggling personally because everything that comprised our normal life has changed. And it's really hitting older people hard who may be isolated. It's hitting young people hard who are accustomed to their peers and their friends just comprising a really critical part of every day. So for me, I think that's the greatest learning personally from this era of COVID-19 is the importance of human connection. And I have to ask myself, what am I going to do to make sure I carry that forward when we finally sort of get out of sheltering in place? The second personal thing that I have learned is my work priorities are really out of balance. I would get on planes and go to cities and give talks and come back home and work on an essay or work on a book. And I'm on 4 boards and blah, blah, blah. And I got this idea and that idea. I'm never, at a loss for new ideas of things to do. That's not changed. What has changed is that all of it now fits into this laptop. Okay. So when the podcast I want to start is here on this laptop, and the book I'm trying to write is here on this laptop, and this interview I've been asked to give is here on this laptop, and the board that I'm on is here on this laptop, and the other board, and all of a sudden, it's somehow easier to weigh the relative merits of all of these things. All of these things are happening on my laptop sometime during the day, and it's made it easier for me to say, wait a minute, why am I devoting so many hours to this thing when this is the one that matters most to me, or these are the 3 that matter most to me? It's helping me kind of think about how I might carve away the things that it turns out are really not my highest priorities and are taking time away from the things I most cherish. So that's my second personal learning. That's me. Again, I want you to be curious about what's coming up for you about the personal, in your personal life. What are the lessons COVID is teaching you and how you might respond, which is where we're ultimately going to go in the questions. Now I want to shift to what is COVID teaching us politically? What is it teaching me? What is it revealing? And of course, it is revealing a lot. And I think fundamentally it is revealing that our America, our society, our democracy, our dream of what we think we are, all of that is really fragile and frail and tenuous and maybe even broken. And so here are some examples that are top of mind for me in that realm. I'm going to go back to Zoom. The first thing we all did was shift everything to Zoom. And you remember how hard it was. Some of y'all I know. Some of y'all had a hard time logging on today, I know, right? Remember when it was brand new and it was all this crazy thing, and it wasn't just League of Women Voters is going to now be on Zoom. It wasn't just the boards that I'm on or the other meetings I'm a part of. It was school. Teachers will have about a minute to figure out how to put their curriculum online and create a pedagogy for online learning and connect with their students through these tiny little webcams. And in communities like ours, that went relatively smoothly. But do you know that 7 million children in these United States lack broadband access in their homes? Even if they have the device, even if they have the laptop, the Chromebook donated by the school, right, or what have you, even if they've got the device, doesn't make a difference if they can't get to the internet with a speed that's fast enough to allow for the downloading of whatever the teacher is trying to offer by way of a pedagogical experience, by way of content, okay? We have learned, if we didn't already know it, that millions of people, often rural communities, often urban communities, poor folks, often Black and brown folks and white poor, are not able to access the content called their schooling. They're not able to participate in the workplace because, you know, the work has gone online, but they don't have the connectivity at home. Okay, what I learned is that the internet and access to it is today what telephones, electricity, and roads were in yesteryear. If you don't have those things, you cannot participate. And we have a Senate that has repeatedly refused to put the money into the stimulus package to close what Common Sense Media calls the homework gap, which is the number of kids that don't have devices or access to Wi-Fi. They say it's $3 to $5 billion. I'm on the board of Common Sense Media, so just want you to know that. But you know, they're just lobbying for this, as many, many people are. So I learned about that, that we as a nation have failed to ensure that poor kids can get a quality education. Because when that, well, in general, we know that poor schools are, poor communities have underfunded schools. Now we know you can't even access online education. Of course, if you're poor, you don't have the literal tools. And that has been really made clear by COVID. The second thing is, for me, the health disparities revealed by COVID. We started to learn who was dying. And wasn't it devastating to learn that it's Black people and brown people who are dying? First, we thought it was older people, people with pre-existing conditions, right? The young seemed safe, this and that. Then we learned that it was Black people dying in record numbers. Why? Because COVID is going to come for you if you have diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease. Who's more likely to have these things? Black people. Why? Because being Black in America is incredibly stressful. But I'm getting ahead of myself, right? So that's another thing that was revealed. Wow, we have disparities in health outcomes and health experiences. Wow, we have disparities in access to healthcare and health insurance. We already knew that, but somehow COVID is shining this like blinding light on that truth. The third issue I think that came up for me was voting. Because if you recall, I know you know better than most, we've got primaries underway as COVID is happening. Some states had to boot their primary to yesterday because they didn't want to have it in May. They thought it'd be done by June, right? We don't have we don't have enough polling places right? So people are now having to stand in these long lines in order to just exercise their franchise. Some states are refusing to allow mail-in ballots as a legitimate form of voting. So the whole franchise, the ability to make change at the local, state, and national level is threatened by our unwillingness to ensure that everybody has access to the ballot. And somehow watching these people, despite COVID, wearing their masks, right? Milwaukee, donning those masks and standing in line and, just to ensure that they were going to vote. And one of my classmates from high school is a newly elected judge in Wisconsin, Jill Karofsky, because people refused to just sit this one out. But it shouldn't take bravery to vote in the United States of America. The fourth issue that comes up for me is how policing was revealed to be so different. Policing of the virus, so different for dark-skinned people versus light. A Tale of Two Cities was an article in the New York Times, and it showed imagery of white millennials. This was in, I don't know, April, early April, mid-April. White millennials out in a park in New York City, and they were not social distancing, and they were not wearing masks. And the police were just coming up and saying, hey, you might want to, please, blah, blah, blah. But in brown communities in that same state, the police were handcuffing the black and brown people for not wearing masks. Come on, people, it's 2020. This shouldn't be happening. And of course it was happening, and we thought that was bad, and we had no idea what was going to come. Soon, those on the right, particularly the libertarian right, began to feel that these public health measures were in a violation of their right to freedom, right? They took the mantra from the pro-choice movement, my body, my choice, and they began marching on state capitals with signs, my body, my choice, no masks. And sometimes they were armed. And of course, they were all white. Can you imagine if a group of armed black and brown people stormed their state capitol? Just picture for 10 seconds what would have happened. We know, right? We know because you don't have to be armed to be taken down by police. And that is, of course, what we learned yet again with the murder of George Floyd. Hours before George Floyd was murdered, Amy Cooper was using her white female privilege in Central Park. She had decided she was unhappy that a black man had told her, please curb your dog. They were in a bird watching area. He was a birder with the Audubon Society. And he asked her to curb her dog, and she got so nasty on him. You've probably seen the video. She said, I'm going to call the police and tell them an African-American man is threatening my life. Okay? Evoking To Kill a Mockingbird, fiction by Harper Lee about that very thing. Evoking the reality of Emmett Till, 14 years old, murdered because some white woman said he winked at her. Murdered and left to rot in a swamp, okay? This is not the past, and it is not fiction. This is our America today. And Amy Floyd knew it. She just decided, I'm going to say my life is in danger. This is what white women have done. Now remember, what did I tell you? If stuff comes up for you as I talk, right? I'm not talking to you. I'm not pointing my finger at you. All right. Because I know some of you are like, not all white women. I would not, right? I'm not, don't go there. Try to not be defensive. Okay. Try to listen to the bigger picture point, which is that historically in America, this is what has happened. Okay. The narrative of the white woman damsel in distress alleging that a black or brown man happened to look at her wrong is what has led to lynchings and other forms of murder right up to our present moment. Who knows what would have happened had the cops come in response to Amy Cooper's phone call. And then 3 hours later, I believe, George Floyd was slowly murdered in Minneapolis, caught on video. And I think it was a blessing that we happen to be in COVID-19 and on lockdown because everybody seemed to see it. Everybody saw that video. Everybody's outraged. And I, as an African-American, am damn glad for the outrage. But here's the question. Where was your outrage in 2014 when a 12-year-old black child was playing in the park near his home in Cleveland, Ohio with a toy gun? And the police came and shot him dead. And even when they realized, oh, it was just a child, he's got a toy gun, they did not perform life-saving measures on him to save his life. Now, my news feed was full of that in 2014. Okay, I heard about it as it happened because I'm interested in what's happening to Black people in this nation. So my news feed was not silent, nor was I. But so many of my white friends were posting cat videos that day and that week. And, oh, I'm doing this, or look what I'm eating for dinner, right? So I'm inviting you to ask if your news feed was not filled with anguish and anger when a 12-year-old boy named Tamir Rice was slain by the police in Cleveland. By the way, those officers never went to jail. Ask yourself, whose media were you paying attention to that day and that week? How did you miss that one? Ask yourself that, okay? Ask yourself it differently. Ask yourself, what would have happened if Tamir Rice was instead named Tommy Rice, and he was a lovely little blonde white boy, and he'd been gunned down by police for having a toy gun in a park in daylight? Ask yourself how quickly we would have had police reform. My bet is 72 hours. And of course, there's the case of Trayvon Martin, 17, walking back to his dad's girlfriend's house in a gated community in Florida with a drink and some Skittles, presumed to be a bad actor, presumed to be a wrongdoer. Trayvon was 17 when my son was 12. And thanks to the murder of Trayvon, my veil of ignorance about racism staying at bay if you're upper middle class, that veil was removed. I think I thought that by being educated and working in important places and having a certain amount of money and living in Palo Alto, my children would be safe. But the murder of Trayvon Martin in Sanford, Florida, forced me to confront the fact that my child is not safe anywhere in America. And my newsfeed told me about Trayvon. Did yours? And if so, why not? The last thing I'll say is about what this COVID has taught us politically is that white supremacy is very much on the rise and feels emboldened, feels it has permission from the dog whistles it hears from our leaders. And it feels its moment has come. It has come out from the rock under which it's been swarming like maggots. It's come out and it intends to live. What do maggots become when they become the next thing? Do they have like a, but my mom's a scientist, so I'm asking, I'm trying to get technical, forget that. A maggot becomes, it's gonna kind of take on new life. Flies, thank you, Megan Sweezy Fogarty. Now they've become flies and they're swarming around, and they're flies that bite and they're flies that kill. So white supremacy is back, folks. Like it or not, I hope none of you like it. It's here. And this is our America, and COVID has shown us just how virulent it is. The other thing that COVID is showing us is that Gen Z, Generation Z, iGen, Zoomers, whatever you want to call them, the kids who were born kind of since 9/11, they are on fire. They are in this space of, oh, hell no, okay? Y'all ruined this climate. We barely have a healthy planet to live on. We have drastic income inequality. We've got rampant systemic racism that's been around for hundreds of years, and a lot of other problems. And these kids, armed with their values and armed with their completely facile use of technology in all its forms, they are starting to turn the tide. And I don't want to place too much on them and on that, because I know there are a lot of people sort of generalizing about them, almost as if they're here to save us. I tell you what, they've learned that they can't trust the grown-ups in their lives because the grown-ups have not prepared a safe place for them in which to grow up. And I'm delighted by their activism, and I try to stand shoulder to shoulder with them rather than lead or even push them from behind. Whatever they want to do, I'm excited about. Was honored to join their rally here in Palo Alto in early June about Black Lives Matter. So what are we going to take with us and do differently? I'm just going to quickly sum up some thoughts, then open it up to questions. On the personal side, so just taking a step back from all that political, now I'm coming back to the personal. For me, fewer structured activities. When we get out of this COVID sheltering thing, if we can ever go back to, we don't have masks or we don't have to hide from one another anymore, I hope the dividends I'll take away, fewer structured activities, more intentionality about how I do spend my time, about doing what really matters to me, about prioritizing instead of just trying to do a little bit of everything, more family time, more time on relationships broadly. I came to realize, you know what? I know a lot of people and I'm friendly with a lot of people, but do I have very many close friends? And the answer was no. Why? Because I've devoted a large part of these 52 years, certainly my adult years, to, you know, getting an education and having a profession and being really good at those things if I can and learning and growing. But I have not tended to my relationships, and COVID has really shone a light on that for me. And I want and am doing something about that now and intend to going forward. And I think also personally, it's made me recognize the privilege I have and the things I can do with that privilege to try to make life better for people who have less privilege than me. I think I've always cared about that. That's a natural bent for me, but this disease, this virus has really shone a light on the ways in which I can use my privilege and my voice and influence to try to make life better. And then on the political side, you know, what are we going to take with us? Well, we got to do something about voting rights because they are once again back up for grabs, you know, back up for grabs. Depending on the state you live in, you might get to vote, you might not. It all depends on whether your state legislature cares about people like you. You know, here we are in our bubble, Bay Area, but voting rights are under siege, and you know that better than anybody. And we've got to tackle that. People are lacking access to broadband, as I discussed. You know, it's the equivalent of roads and television and electricity. And what are we going to do to make sure everyone can participate? Because democracy is not a spectator sport. Well, you know, how are we going to ensure full participation if people don't even have the devices and the broadband? And then we're taking away from this that racism is absolutely embedded in the fabric of American life, in our government, in our corporations, in our nonprofits, in our schools, in our neighborhoods, and in our families. And that's a really tough thing to confront and acknowledge, but we will never be the country we purport to be until we put that away and to bed for good. I guess fundamentally for me, it's what is a democracy if people can't participate, whether due to their socioeconomic status or the color of their skin? What is a democracy if people can't fully participate? So the question I want to leave you with, and now we'll open it up to Q&A, is I want you to ask yourself, who am I really? What am I going to do about any of this? How can I make the brave but necessary choices required to help our democracy get back on its feet and thrive? And what's the role of the League of Women Voters of Palo Alto in any of this? And with that, I'm closing my book, and we're going to open it up for Q&A, and I'm happy to hear whatever is on your mind.
Hi, I'm Kathy Miller. I'm going to help with questions. Some provocative ones you asked at the end. I just want you to answer for me. How are we going to get this country back on democracy back on its feet? But I will let the one that's up here from Mary Jo Levy. She says, "What media do you use to get your information?" So you were saying, you know, what are we seeing in our feeds? And I think a lot of us are not these, you know, necessarily social media users so much as newspaper readers. I'm guessing in the league. But is there some other sources that you're looking?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to step back. Thank you, Mary Jo, and thank you, Kathy, for running this portion. I think it comes back to whose narratives are you interested in, okay? So if you have friends who are completely like you demographically and have sort of a similar life experience and so on, you're likely to hear stories in your, you know, in your travels, whether it's social media or interactions or the stories you pay attention to in the newspapers you read, you're sort of gonna hear the stuff and pay attention to the stuff that sounds like, you know, the life you lead. But when you have a family that is multiracial, or you have friends who are different races and ethnicities or religions than you, you by extension start to care about the issues germane to those populations. Even if, you know, you're not a member of that group, you love people in that group, you start to care. If you have a trans family member or a close friend, you have queer family members or close friends, even if you're not of that group, your heart starts to beat a little bit more rapidly for them because you love them. And when you care about somebody, you care about any hurt that they or their community are experiencing. So in part, it's, you know, who are you following, you know, who's in your community, and what can you do to broaden your connections so that you are aware of the suffering around you, even if it's not in your specific community. And in terms of social media, you know, paying attention to, like, who can you follow? What pages could you follow? Particular leaders. And I'm not going to tell you specific answers here because there's just an infinite number of people you could be listening to and following, but who are leaders in the Black community or the Latino community or the queer community or the Muslim community, or whatever communities you feel like, you know, you want to pay more attention to. In terms of media, one of the things I love is The Week, that weekly news magazine that aggregates the news, national and international, from various vantage points. So they'll say, you know, topic, blah, 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 says the New York Times, blah, 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 says the Wall Street Journal, and they'll have a few other voices in there. So you're getting not a particular slant or bias, but you're getting a topic presented in a number of ways. A new resource I've just learned about, which is, I think, entirely online, is called allsides.com. And this is a website, and they're on social media as well, that'll say, here's the topic, the George Floyd murder, or protests about Black lives. And then they'll give you an article called the red article, which is the conservative viewpoint, the purple article, which is the moderate viewpoint, and the blue article, which is the left viewpoint. So you can kind of, you know, read up on an issue and really understand kind of a fuller range of perspectives on the topic. And I think, you know, we got to hold our friends close and our enemies closer. And so I know the League is nonpartisan. Wherever you are politically, it behooves us all to have a sense of what the other sides or other perspectives, arguments are, in order to strengthen our own thinking and have the opportunity to reach some understanding where it's possible.
Okay, thank you. Well, people aren't posting to the Q&A. I'm looking at the chat room though, and oh, here comes somebody. I'm concerned about, this is Susan Wright, I'm concerned that the importance of protecting our climate is getting forgotten as the community is suddenly aware of the urgent problems you mentioned. Do you have any suggestions for how people can braid these things together and address them together?
I don't. I'm not a climate person. I'm far more concerned about violence toward Black people than I am about the climate. I realize that may not be your prerogative, your priority. I, as a Black person, for me, that's the existential threat. I realize the climate is also in dire circumstances. I'm just not anyone who can really speak to that topic. I care about it, but I'm not a leader or a thinker on that topic. But maybe others will weigh in the chat with some resources and things.
Okay. So Megan mentioned in the chat, she said, does the League have a position on broadband as an inequality question? Now, that's not a question for you, but I'm not really sure we do. And I guess, do you have any thoughts on how one would take action on that? You mentioned the Senate was considering some funding.
Yeah.
Didn't vote on it. Are there other things that could be done?
Yeah. I think it's the NEA, National Education Association, that has some really good material on the homework gap. If you just Google homework gap, you're going to find information. There was a petition that you can sign. Like I mentioned, Common Sense Media really cares about this. So Google homework gap and check out 3 or 4 of the links that come up, and you can figure out who's active and how, and what's kind of what the next steps are there. I will tell you that I have some notes handy from a radio show I was on back in April about this issue. It was an NPR nationally, and I had pulled out some notes about local, because we were talking about the homework app nationally, and I wanted to know kind of how things are here. In San Jose, right down the street, there's something called the Digital Inclusion Fund, sjdigitalinclusion.org. They reported that 95,000 San Jose residents lack internet access at home. Mm-hmm. And so that's just a very local example. Another local solution, another example that is a solution is this amazing nonprofit in Oakland called techexchange.org that refurbishes computers and sells them at very, very low cost. And people can even request them for free. I think they have a sliding scale. So they're trying to refurbish and donate. So you can donate to them, you can donate machines to them. And they're also advising people who lack internet access on home internet options available through Sonic, AT&T, and Comcast that are, relatively affordable. Like they're helping people kind of bridge that gap in access and understanding. So hopefully those are of interest to folks.
Great. Someone in the chat mentioned, I think this might be back on the media question. Someone said SKIM, S-K-I-M-M, and Fareed Zachariah GPS as being maybe other media sources. I'm not familiar. I just thought I'd mention that they're in here.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many people, you if you like podcasts, there are terrific podcasts that are hosted by Black people talking about the Black experience. I don't have a handy list of resources for y'all. And frankly, what's hard for me in this moment is when a lot of white folks are asking me, what should we be reading? What should we be listening to? What should we, right? There's a heavy lift for those of us right now in the Black community who are trying to respond to this sudden awakening. And so, I encourage you to, I guess I would be Googling things, and I encourage you to Google yourself and come up with resources that feel good for you. There isn't one is the point, or even five. There are a myriad of people, thinkers, writers, speakers, authors, scientists, and so it takes work, and you can do it.
Right. Okay, there's some more questions. Terry Godfrey says, I'm heartened to see more people of color making progress in elections. Jamal Bowman beating Elliot Engel feels huge. There are organizations devoted to getting women into office. Are you familiar with similar organizations for people of color? Not specifically.
I'm focused on getting people in office. I don't know. I tend to hear about individuals as opposed to it coming through some kind of organizing organization. Color of Change. I follow. I feel like Color of Change and Act Blue and maybe it's Color of Change. Steve Phillips' organization, which I can't recall the name of off the top of my head. Let me see if I can find it. Steve Phillips, who is with Democracy in Color. That's another great organization, Democracy in Color.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's a really good point. I have a friend who runs the group Women Count, and they specifically crowdfund for women candidates, and there could easily be a similar thing.
Yeah. What I'm not getting from the questions is a lot of personal introspection, and I'd love to go there. My big question whenever I'm interviewed these days is, what are you doing to make your community kinder and safer for Black people? Mm-hmm. And coupled with, do you see Black people as fully human? I think COVID has revealed in so many respects that in many places and spaces, systemically and at the level of the individual in America, Black people are not treated as fully human. I think if that police officer had knelt his knee on a dog, the outcry would have been even quicker and perhaps more anguished. And so I want to ask, do you see Black people as fully human? And of course you're saying, yes, of course I do, I think. And so my pushback is, how do you know? What's the evidence that in your life that your value is backed up by action. And I'd love anyone who's willing to share their thoughts on that. And I'm also very interested in whatever other questions people have, but I just wanted to kind of to put a pin in that. I did a lot. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
I'm not seeing any comments on that yet, but
okay. Keep going, Kathy. The League is a very white organization, and you know that. And
oh yeah,
it's it's something that is ostensibly a concern for you. And I think to move from the language articulating we're interested in diversity and so on to actually putting in practice a plan to be actively anti-racist. I mean, this is what's required and being asked in our moment. And so I believe that change happens at the level of the individual, which is why I'm asking that question about who am I really? What am I going to do about any of this?
Right. Anybody chiming in on this? I think it's all a little bit scary. I don't know why, but that's what my reaction would be. Elaine Nuckerman says, make an effort to connect with people at all levels. Delivery persons, treating everyone as a person you are interested in and respect them.
That's nice. Elaine, my goodness, we met way, way, way back. What board was that? I can't remember. But thank you for that. Yeah, treating everybody as if they are your own family member, as if they are your own friend.
Yeah. Okay, I think I know where this is going to go, but okay. Rachel Shepard asks, do you have advice for how to approach our people of color friends regarding the BLM issue? Is this something we can simply bring up, or should we couch it as a white ally? I often refer to people's skin color even at work, but I see peers either thirsty to also engage in the conversation or move away, possibly due to fear.
Yeah. There's a lot being written right now about how white people can be good allies. And it boils down, so I urge you to Google that. And these are good questions to be asking. There was something beautiful on Instagram the other day that I thought was something everybody should see. So the very first thing that I think a Black or brown skin friend or family member or colleague wants to know right now is that they are on your mind because you anticipate that what's been happening in America might be really particularly scary, frightening, traumatic for them. But you want to do it in a way that centers them. So you might just check in and say, hey, I just want you to know you've been on my mind lately. I wanted you to know I'm thinking about you. If you feel like talking, I'd love to listen, but please don't feel obligated. I just want you to know I'm here. That's a way to offer compassion without making it about your need for more information or your need to know how to get more involved. I have certainly found those offerings to be wonderful, kind of that outreach of that hand that I was describing much earlier. And then ally work is about trying to make sure it's not becoming about you, it's keeping the conversation centered on the experience that Black and brown people are having, and committing to using your privilege to advance that cause that is led by them. Too often, historically, we have well-intentioned white folks who decided to march off in a new direction and lead something, do something, fix something without being cognizant of the fact that people of color have been worrying about this and dealing with this and trying to strategize on solutions for far longer. And what you want to do is kind of join and support rather than, kind of wrest the talking stick away from them and make it yours.
I'm going to check in with Myra. I know we only have 5 minutes left and she needs a couple minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chris Witzel is saying, I reached out to a Black friend, not connected with her in years. I was concerned at her reaction, but it was a wonderful reconnection. David Thornton is saying to tell people to read White Fragility and How to Be an Anti-Racist. Yeah, White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. Waking Up White by Debbie Irving is another good one. And Ibram X. Kendi's books, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Also, his definitive history on racism is his older book. And I'm doing this because it's like this thick. It's called Stamped from the Beginning. And he's probably considered our leading voice on race and racism and how to undo it right now.
Great. Myra, did you want to step in and is she there?
You know, Allison, one of our local electeds. Hi, Myra, just one sec. Let me read this from Allison. Sure. She's on our city council and is really pulling the laboring oar on dealing with, you know, the fiscal realities that Palo Alto, like any municipality, is confronting in the era of a pandemic. And she's a dear friend from college, and she just had a great comment. She said, when I come in and greet a group of people, I intentionally start with Black and brown people, younger people, and women. It often disrupts the usual order. I will do this even when I know that the older white man is the senior person I'm supposed to be meeting. That's a lovely example. I think also when we're in groups and we're giving a talk and it's live and everyone's raising their hand, you know, who's always raising their hand? White men feel very confident raising their hand all the time. And they do. And it cracks me up that I could be giving a talk on race to 200 people and there are 10 white men in the audience. And I say, okay, questions, and the white men's hands go up. And I want to say, is there anything in you that thinks maybe I ought to shut up for 5 minutes and let the people of color around me respond with their questions and their responses to what has just been shared about an experience that is much more germane likely to their lived experience than mine. And so and all of us can be aware of whatever privilege we have in the situation. What can we do to not be, if we're the most privileged person, we should not be the first to speak, because it's so much harder for anybody else who has less privilege than us to get their voice heard if only those with the most privilege do all the talking.
I think I'm gonna, with that, say that we're done with questions and answers, and Myra's gonna have a few things to say.
Okay, well first I want to say, Julie, thank you so very much for sharing your very personal story, your emotional involvement in all of the issues we're facing today. Very thought-provoking and very challenging, and I'm sure that everyone took something very personal away with them in listening to you speak. So thank you for that, and thank you for being so open and so candid. And I think what happens at these talks is that the questions and all the chat just starts happening so close to the end. We never really quite have enough time for that part because it takes people a while to sort of get in the groove of doing that. So I know there were now many more questions that we didn't have time for. So I just want to, thank you for those of you who did send in questions and participate. I also want to share with you that we did record this session. So if you are interested in hearing it again or sharing it with friends, we will be putting that on our Facebook page. And we'll send out a link for that. So watch for that, because I'm sure that there are some who were not able to come today that still want to listen to the recording. So that's coming. Also want to let you know that we really are interested in your feedback. We would like to hear from you, and we are sending out a Survey Monkey. So please take a few minutes. It's not lengthy. It's really concise. Share your thoughts with us. Let us know what you liked. Let us know who you might like to hear from. We will continue this speaker series program. This is the second in our series, and we hope to have many more to come. We are actively working on getting something on schedule for August. So stay tuned and watch your emails. You'll get an invite in the mail, in your email, and it'll be announced in our voter. So speaking of voter and email, I want to segue for 1 second while I have a nice size audience here of League members and possibly guests of League members to let you know that we are in great search and need for someone to head up our communications committee. That person does so much work in terms of keeping all of you informed about activities and positions, and just it's immense, the amount of work that goes into providing the voter and the e-blasts. And we are reaching out to see if anyone out there is interested in taking this on. There will be coaching involved. You wouldn't be thrown at you right like bam, zam, do it. Ellen Forbes, who has been diligently doing this for at least the last year, is seeking help. And I would just like to encourage those of you who have an interest or skills in that area to think about it and get back in touch. You can write to our office, which is League Women Voters PA office at gmail.org. So that would be LWVPA office at gmail.org, or directly to Ellen Forbes, and grab a pencil. If you are interested, you can contact her directly at eforbes820@att.net. I'll do that one more time, eforbes820@att.net, or she has given us her direct phone number. So don't spread it around, but she'd be happy to hear from you at 650-494-6152. So again, we need someone to work on the monthly voter write-ups, news, event announcements. She will be at your side, and we really want to put a whole team of people together, because this is a very big job for one person, but a really satisfying, gratifying, and needed job, as communication is such a key to the League and all of our activities. So we want to hear from you. And again, please do look for the SurveyMonkey. We look forward to your responses, and hopefully we'll see you again next time. Thanks, everybody. And thank you, Julie, so much. You're just an amazing speaker, and we love hearing from you.
Thanks, Myra. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for being here. It's great to spend the hour with you.
That's a wrap.